Tales, sponsored by Harbro.
Welcome to another episode of the Top Lines and Tales podcast, and as always we'd like to thank our sponsors Harbro for their continued support, and we'd like to thank you, the listener, for supporting us this long as we reached our 5-year-old milestone. Yes, the Top Lines and Tales 5-year-old, and we're going to continue in this podcast with those 5-year celebrations. This week on Top Lines and Tales, still celebrating our 5th birthday, and a man that I've known for 5 years and more. I'm here with Dr. Bob Hough. Bob, welcome back to the podcast, my friend.
Well, it is fantastic to be back. It's been a little while now, but I went back and counted because I had to fill something out. And I think I've appeared on 21 of your podcasts, but it's probably been about a year now since I've been on one. But
you should get a gold medal there, Bob. I should send you a gold medal in the post.
I get a star. Yeah, you should send me a little star.
I should do that. And we're doing something else first. And this week, when it's been our 5th birthday, I've done something with music that you guys will have seen, and there's other things coming on as well. But this week, we're doing something different because we're going to involve you, the listener, in this one. So what I'm going to do is Bob and I are going to have a chat. We're going to give you guys some decisions, and we're going to ask you, listener, there to vote on who's done what. So to hold with us on this one.
By the way, I love your music.
Okay.
I listened. It was fantastic. So congratulations on. But I had fun. I laid there and listened to that whole album.
Excellent.
What talent to be able to do that kind of thing. That's great.
Thank you. That's a bit of fun. So on this first half, we're going to do this in 2 halves. There, Bob and myself. We're going to do a debate, and we're going to take on Angus versus Aberdeen, and we're talking Aberdeen Angus here, of course. So we're going to take the county of Angus versus the county of Aberdeen, and Bob's going to go for the Aberdeen side. I'm going to go for the Angus side, and we're talking about these 2 great pioneers that started, of course, this Aberdeen Angus breed, and we're talking about Hugh Watson versus William McCombie. So the 2 great guys that started the breed, one slightly older than the other one. Bob's going to take McCombie. He's going to tell us what McCombie did and didn't do, and how great he was, and maybe he wasn't. I'm going to stand up for Hugh Watson in the very same way. So we'll go through a few details of each one of those, and then we'll let you guys, the listener, decide whether who put more of a contribution and was maybe the better guy in the Aberdeen Angus breed that of course that these 2 guys shaped. And then Bob, I'm gonna pick up here first, if that's okay, because I'm gonna pick up Hugh Watson. Now you're the man, to be fair, has done a lot more research on Watson than I have, but Hugh Watson's family were Hugh Watson, born 1789, so he's the oldest of these guys, as I said, and born there in Angusshire, and his family were factors, weren't they? So his family would be managers of some of the big estates of some of the gentry there, wouldn't he? And he'd be an interesting guy. He'd be a bit of a move. The family would be movers and shakers, wouldn't they? Be fairly well recognized.
Absolutely, and it allowed him to run in circles with a bunch of lords and uppity ups that normally a commoner, I think, didn't have access to. But I mean, he ran in good company, that's for sure.
He certainly wasn't a commoner. For all a farmer might be a commoner, he wasn't quite the commoner that people or certainly thought he wasn't anyway. A commoner, he with his parents, a flamboyant character, I think, wasn't he? And his parents will have mixed, as he said, with the rich and famous by factoring some of these estates. And he went off to college. I don't think he lasted very long at college doing his studies, but he had a bloody good time at his college. I think he did a lot of partying, I think, Bob.
Yeah, well, I mean, he did a lot of partying when he got back home too. I think he spent but I mean, his father leased him a major tenancy. I mean, right from the time he got home. So I mean, he was in charge of his own fate right from the beginning, and I guess he was a great farmer. But McCombie also, his father actually owned land in Aberdeenshire, and but you know, when he came home from college early, he quit college, and they had the resources to send him to college. But he put on the plowing detail, so they had a very different. Their fathers had a very different take on how they approached the beginning of their career. So he certainly didn't take over a tendency. He took over the end of a plow, although his father did let him be an active drover.
He did, and he said about the droving. We're just talking about the McCombie family. McCombie, 16 years younger than Watson, for those that are listening. And of course, we're talking here, of course, Watson at Keeler and McCombie at Tilly Four, those two great names. But Bob, the guys were cattle dealers. I mean, it's not like a cattle dealer now go to the market and stick 500 sheep or 100 cattle on a truck and send them down the way. These guys, his ancestors, would trawl the north of Scotland, and they'd go through and they'd find people who would buy one cow or two cows, and he'd go along and maybe buy the 10 off them in one go and assemble a fair number of cows. His grandfather would do, and his father, and then drive these cattle south. It would be a hell of a life for well, hell of an eye opener, of course, to young McCombie, but hell of a life to these older guys.
Yeah, I found it very interesting because they did have to gather them up. I mean, there was some operations, obviously, you know, the bigger tendency. But and then there was the crofters and the crofters that might only have one or two head, and you had to gather them up. And Combe tended to deal with a little better quality cattle, so he didn't necessarily go for as many Highlanders or Highland Buck and Humleys and those kind of smaller, lower production cattle. But yeah, I mean, they would have to gather them up. They had to drive them. Then, I mean, they it was a tremendous task. And they also had the reavers, which and for us Americans are, I guess, cattle rustlers, which I guess is quite an enterprise. And so I mean, it was not a not, it was some danger to it too. And then they generally marketed them, and I think didn't they in the Central Belt? Wasn't there a whole series of trysts in the Central Belt, and they would overwinter them, and then take them to England after that, graze them one summer there, and then go to England.
I think McCombie's dealings probably would have stopped at the border, certainly in the earlier days, and somebody else would have taken them the rest of the way. But yes, they would definitely gather these animals. But I mean, they've had a reputation, dealers have had a reputation in livestock for being hard men and hard men to deal with. And will take a shilling where they can find, or take 2 shillings where they got one if they could. And he would be a hard man as well. He'd grown up with, I think, from what I see, the difference between Watson and McCombie, and bear in mind I'm standing up for Watson here, is that I think Watson would be a little bit more, a high society and maybe just not quite such a hard worker. Whereas McCombie, you just feel these guys just knew how to do an 18-hour day, and gee, you wouldn't want to mess with any of them, and you certainly wouldn't want to mess with William McCombie. I think he's a big rough lad.
Oh, he was. I mean, I think he was well over 6 foot, and we're talking about the beginning of the 19th century. That is really, really a big man. And if you look at him, he is a huge boned man. I mean, just large skull, large hands, and I don't think he was a very good public speaker. And for somebody that went into politics, for periods of times and did public service, I think he almost always had to write down what he was going to say. And he also, when he went down to Parliament, he spoke as much in Doric as he did in English. So I think they used to make fun of him quite a bit. And he would wear, I don't know, is there some kind of really rough wool suits that more worker kind of people wear, that they're not dyed and they're very, very rough? I guess he wore those a lot. And anyway, they took him as a bit of a rube, but he was a smart guy.
They did. I think you're right. They did take a bit at him, and when he was down there, as opposed to Watson, who was out there mixing with the famous people. Well, later on maybe we'll talk about Queen Victoria in there. He was in amongst all the movers and the shakers and the writers, and he'd be smoking and drinking and he dressed well and mixed in those circles. And he loved his greyhound racing, and when he was into his sports and banquet speaking, they say he could turn up at a banquet and he could just unlike McCombie, you would have to have it written down for 3 or 4 days. Watson just turned up at a banquet and they say, over to you, Mr. Watson, to speak, and he'd just keep everybody entertained and natural gift of the gab there, I think. And the difference between the two of them as men, I think the two of us have put across there. What about when it comes to you listener out there, if you're listening through this, we're matching these two against each other. So Watson against McCombie. McCombie, a bit more of a peasant side, probably a wealthier family, but lived a reasonable, humble life compared to Watson. Maybe not quite such a wealthy family, but a guy with a gift of the gab and a bit of bullshit about him, I suppose we're saying. But let's go to the cattle. Bob, and see. I mean, I'll start with Watson. His father gave him 6 black cows. The best they had, I suppose. His father had the farm before he took on Keely. His father and his grandfather, I think, or his uncle, I think, had the farm, and they'd been breeding black cattle for a while. They'd taken he would be up in the north, round and about. He'd see the Kylos, he'd see the Highland cows, he'd see the Shorthorns, all of them, and he would see the best of those and realize that maybe the Angus, or the black polled cattle as they were then before they were called Angus, he would say they're the best. And then his father had been breeding these for 20, 30 years, I think, before he took on the tenancy. And his father gave him 6 black cows. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, William Watson, his father. And what did he do? He got rid of those and he went and bought 10 more. He bought some better ones. So I think probably in his downside, an ungrateful bugger, really, that his father gave him 6 cows, but he knew what he wanted, and they weren't good enough for him.
Well, interestingly enough, he had spent about 10 years partying, but he really got serious about farming, and he was apparently a great farmer and a fantastic entrepreneur, because he was in all kinds of businesses, from railroads to lime kilns to bringing in bone meal and grinding it up and selling it. But Watson was much more secretive, for darn sure. McCombie was, although a very quiet man, was much more, encompassing of various people and various classes of people. And he was a fierce advocate for his workers on his farm. And I think he did a great job there. I think one thing with McCombie's family being, well, Aberdeen was kind of, from what I can tell, was really the runway where those cattle came down through. The drovers' cattle mainly came through Aberdeen, and with their family being such big drovers, second probably the Williamsons, I think he got to experience so many different kinds of cattle and their temperament, their type, their productivity. And so I think that gave him a real advantage on the type that he wanted to put together, where he thought, what type of work specifically in his environment. And so I think, really that was a tremendous advantage for him.
And would you say, I suppose we look at the 16 years, it's quite a difference, really. McCombie being 16 years the younger, he'll be looking at Watson. He'll be looking over his shoulder and seeing what's going on. Watson's not, he's not sharing any of this stuff, is he? Watson's going, I'm doing this, and I'm the man I've got the brilliance here and the pizzazz to go with that. But I'm not sharing this out there unless I'm going to sell you a cow or two. And I think McCombie would have had the advantage of being the younger one there that was prepared to take those animals on, but and tell everybody what he was doing, really. Whereas Watson, just I don't know whether it's a nasty or awkward streak he had about him. But when you said about his business, he had great business with his stagecoaches there. He ran that, and he was always experimenting with these various things there. And fertilizer he was experimenting with, wasn't he, Bob? And first man, I think, to bring turnips.
Oh yeah, no, I'm quite sure he introduced turnip agriculture into Forfarshire. I think he was a forerunner of that, without a doubt.
Mm-hmm. And bringing all that in there, doing all these things, and I suppose the other thing maybe between them is that Watson didn't just have his eye totally on the Angus. He realized that still the Angus cattle that he was trying to breed was still a makeup of some of the other animals, and he ran a herd of Shorthorn cattle there, which no doubt they would have crossed him in. I think that's documented, and he crossed them and they decided maybe he didn't like them. And he had a herd of Galloways as well, Bob, and that's quite documented. So a lot of people know that. We probably should chat us on this as you're listening to this podcast that Bob and I have written a book on the history of the Angus breed, where some of this research is coming from, and there's a lot of stuff in that book that people don't really know. And one of those things probably is that Hugh Watson played a lot about with the Galloways there and amongst those Angus back in those early days.
Well, yeah, his very first sales that he had, his production sales, I mean, he advertised heavily that all of his cattle were bred or crossed with Galloway, and that he felt that that was an ideal animal for the region, the Angus Dottie Galloway cross. And so he very much promoted that at the very beginning. That's kind of gotten lost in our in our modern understanding of history, but I mean, it's all in black and white and in the newspapers, in his ads. I mean, it's very, very much, but he never sent a pedigree. He never gave anybody pedigrees on anything. And so nobody knew what exactly the cattle are. Interesting, one of the ads had Old Jock, or Old Galloway Jock. So, I mean, not only Old Jock, there was Galloway Jock. So, but I think he moved back towards Angus Dotties without a doubt. Where, McCombie, through his cattle dealing, I mean, there was 9 strains of cattle in the northeastern Scotland, and some of those were pretty useless, like the Highland Buck and Humleys, not the Lowland Buck and Humleys. Those were at the bottom of McCombie's list in terms of productivity. The Kylos, the West Highlanders up in the Grampian Highlands with the Highland Buck and Humleys, they were also at the bottom of his list, although he showed a champion at Smithfield that was a Highlander. But he kind of boiled it down to he liked the Aberdeen horn cattle, which eventually went extinct. And then he liked the Lowland Buck and Humleys. He thought those were very, very productive cattle. And the Angus Dotties from Forfarshire. And so he built his program around that. And he especially was worried about how high percentage many people were getting shorthorns. It got introduced up there, and people kept breeding shorthorn to shorthorn, and he didn't think they were right for the environment, and he stuck to his guns on that. And good for him, because that really was a saving grace of keeping the Aberdeen Angus traits that we want. So I mean, kudos to McCombie that the cattle needed to have the local goodness, and so I mean, I really think that's one point in my area that I got to take, because he stayed pretty tight with the strengths of the local cattle that were best adapted to the environment.
Sure, I get that, but I mean, I put a little bit of point back in my corner, listener. If you're listening to this, that of course Watson was the first one. He was working with white cattle. He was working cattle of all different colours. They weren't just the black ones that came in. He majored on the black side, but he would get some hybrids and some crossbreds coming back in through what he was doing, and especially because he was playing about with a few other breeds. So 16 years, maybe McCombie had some of that to pick off and some of that to look at. But I think we'll go a little bit further with McCombie, and I will have to probably agree with you on this one, as McCombie he was so believed in his cattle for all Watson had old Granny and old Jock and McCombie at Tilly Ford. He came out and he just so believed in these cattle. He just wanted to show them to everybody, Bob, didn't he? And he headed off to Paris. I mean, for God's sake, who in their right mind in Aberdeen should say, well, come on, guys, get on. We're going to start walking. We're going to go to Paris. It's 1,000 miles away, and he did that. I mean, hats off to him. I'll give him that one.
Yeah, no, I mean, he showed highly competitively, and the interesting thing when we're talking about Paris, when he went down, and I mean, he was older at that point when he went down to the World's Fair in Paris, and he just swept it, and he did it with younger cattle. I mean, he didn't do it with aged cattle, which was very, very unusual. And I mean, that put him on the map in the United States, all over the world, because I mean, the World's Fairs used to be big, big, big deals. And I mean, they drew people from everywhere, and they all had livestock shows,
Mm.
tremendous livestock shows. And and so yeah, he would go out and he would be competitive, and but he also, I mean, this is a coin for you. He definitely dipped into Hugh Watson's herd and got when he saw genetics that he liked, he purchased them from Hugh Watson, and some of his great bloodlines came originally from Hugh Watson's herd.
Yeah, it's interesting we talk about Paris because I'm actually in France next week talking to the French Aberdeen Angus Association. And of course, France be very much renowned for its continental cattle, which came into certainly to the UK and the US as well. I think the Charolais, the Simmentals, maybe the Simmentals are Australian, but the Charolais and Limousins and what have you came in there. But at the time, this is a man taking, he's taking coals to Newcastle, really. He's taken, that's probably the wrong expression, but he's taken black cattle down there when they've never seen these things before. And we're talking in the late 1800s, of course, but to turn up but to get them there and get them home, I think was a phenomenal thing to do, Bob. And yeah, feather in his cap on that. But also, he sold some cattle when he was down there. I think some of the first Angus cattle was at Louis XIV. I can't remember now. We're both winging it a bit here, Bob, from memory for all we've done this research a couple of years past. But he definitely sold some cattle down there to the guys while he was there in France and put the first Angus over into Europe, didn't he?
Well, he did, but I'm going to give. I guess I'm going to give you another coin. One of the first times he went down to Paris, and this is before the World's Fair, he had champion bull. McCombie did, and Napoleon III wanted
That,
to buy the bull
that's it.
and started an Angus herd, and he refused to sell it. And the second place animal refused to sell. And so he bought Napoleon III, the emperor, bought Hugh Watson's bull, who happened to be a old jock out of Old Granny. So I mean,
Okay.
it was a royal pedigreed animal.
Number one and two,
Just
number one and
so
two, yeah, yeah.
I mean, just because it had placed third, it was down the line because shows were the be all end all. But I mean, in terms of a breeding animal, Napoleon did the third did all right. Not the original Napoleon Bonaparte, but Napoleon the third.
And I'm right in thinking, Bob, just putting in there that you say the cat were Hugh Watson, but it was Hugh Watson's breeding that McCombie was showing. I don't think Hugh Watson never made that trip with his own cattle, did he? He wasn't quite, he was too busy partying and still there in Edinburgh somewhere.
No, that year he had cattle down there
Oh,
that year.
Watson as well. Okay.
I don't think he had cattle at the Paris Exposition, World's Fair, but he would have been pretty old at that point. That
Mhm.
was. I mean, McCombie was at the end of his career at that point. He was within a couple of years of his death at that
Yeah.
point. So
Okay.
it was. I'm not sure whether Hugh Watson was even alive at that time, but they the one thing is they both spoke highly of each other, which was commendable,
Hmm.
for competitive people. And I don't think I ever saw any place that they didn't speak highly of each other.
Okay.
Matter of fact, McCombie even wrote a small book on breeding, and he spoke very highly of Hugh Watson in that. So I mean, they did show good gentlemanliness about each other and their accomplishments, and they certainly didn't cut on each other, which that in society today we seem to try and get ahead too often by
Yeah.
tearing the other person down. That
Mm-hmm.
was not these two people.
Mm-hmm.
They had some class. They were different. I mean, McCombie was definitely the more rough-hewn, and matter of fact, you were saying about the toasts,
Mm-hmm.
and you Watson joined the yeomanry or yeoman, like a guard,
Yeah. Okay. I'm
so
military.
he
Yeah.
could get a uniform. with feathers and fluff and everything, so he could wear a uniform to banquets and give his toast. So, yeah, Hugh Watson was quite the showman, where that was not McCombie.
Let's just go back. I mean, yeah, you mentioned to me. I think I'm not sure if we put it in our book, and you readers that have read the book, they'll be correcting me hopefully. But I'm right in thinking Queen Victoria visited, and she came and had a look at the cattle.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean that was after McCombie won the championship with Prince, at Smithfield, and also
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Perthshire.
Mhm.
He had the champion at Perthshire, and then Queen Victoria asked him to bring the steer to Windsor Castle so she could inspect it,
Okay.
and which she did, and then one at Smithfield, and McCombie had a baron of saved from the carcass and shipped for their Christmas roast, and so anyway, apparently they enjoyed that very much. So Queen Victoria went to McCombie's place, which from my understanding, which is not very well good understanding, but from my
Still in the back
understanding,
of, it's still in the back of beyond now, Bob, let alone back then. I mean, they used to got a road by it now, but didn't we have a road back then? So yeah, I can imagine her
yeah.
turning up in her carriage there, going, "Where are we going now?"
Well, and for I mean, just a commoner, and actually, he was in a tendency at this point because the farm went to his brother, who was a minister in town,
Mhm.
and so he didn't actually own the place till he was very advanced in age. But anyway, he built a viewing area off his house for Queen Victoria, and he was so honored. And what I heard is they called it round and round because he kind of circled his cattle around several times to impress her on the number of Angus he had, Aberdeen Angus he had.
So he's
So
got 10 cattle, but he takes them by it 10 times. Excellent.
yeah,
Or more than
yeah.
that, maybe. He'd have 400 cattle by then, 300 or 400 cattle by then, wouldn't he, McCombie, I guess?
Well, with the cattle he fed a large, he had a large stalled feedlot.
Mhm.
And so his numbers would get quite high and during the feeding period after the agricultural revolution, where they stopped grassing the cattle down in England and they started feeding them in Scotland.
Mhm.
Once they had the small grain rotation with the turnips and everything and the clover, and so they would actually stall those cattle, feed them, but at that point they had railroads and also steamships to get them down to the London markets and the
Sure,
other major markets. So it
sure.
was, I mean,
Mhm.
there was a tremendous amount of change, and that also caused for a call for different genetics because
Mhm.
they could use genetics with more production.
Mhm.
They also like the Galloways. They fell completely out of favor because of all the hair, and I don't think those barns were very well ventilated, and with all that hair was just not good.
Mhm.
So, and the horns, that was not good
Yeah.
because they wanted to pack them in, and anything with horns, and you have to explain this to me, but everything I've seen, everything I've read, they had the feed trough against the wall,
Mhm.
and so you have to go between the animals to feed them. And so the last thing you wanted was some Highlander with some huge set of horns swinging its head around and impaling you.
Sure, sure.
So, and plus it took up twice as much space. So, I mean, the horns, like the Aberdeen horn cattle, the horns came off, which
You
is
put,
easy to do with whole cattle because it's the dominant trait. So the hair came off. The Galloway kind of cattle that fell out of favor. The horns fell completely out of favor once they started stalling those cattle. But they all, and also whenever they were shipping them on the trains and on the steamships, the amount of bruising and injury they could get, or the really big horn cattle, they could get them caught down and get trampled, and so it just wasn't practical anymore to have horns on the cattle.
if people would around the world would praise Angus for one thing, it would be, of course, because they took the horns up. They were the only polled breed. people stand up and say, well, there was a red pole and there was the various things. No, they all came from the Galloways. They all came from Angus. Maybe Angus came from the Galloways. I don't know, but not having the horns on them obviously was a massive advantage. But the Angus had much more advantage than just that. And maybe the Angus had an advantage because these guys majored on them because they hadn't got the horns, or maybe it was because they got the good carcasses and they hadn't got the horns as well. But these guys both saw that this was a world. This is a world thing. It's gonna take over, and that was the biggest advantage. It still is the biggest advantage, I suppose, or one of the advantages with the Angus. But of course, it was, as you said, it was them feeding the cattle as well that they were producing, the ultimate carcasses that they wanted. And back then, there wouldn't be many cattle in England. They would have been Bakewells, Longhorns, and what have you. And these things would just suddenly start. Well, they sent the Galloways into Norfolk, didn't they? Norfolk in that area down there is quite wet, probably similar to where they came from in the southwest of Scotland, Norfolk being on the southeast of England. And they sent them down there in their thousands, didn't they? And grazed them down there and flooded the market. But yeah, eventually the Angus took over. And Bob, let's just talk a little bit about, because we're talking about these two guys, one against the other one, and you listeners to make up your mind on that. But a lot of it was about the breeding prowess themselves. I mean, the animals. We've not got into the finer details of old Jock and Granny and the Tilly 4 cattle coming through. But they both used Bakewell, didn't they? They used Bakewell and they used some of the Shorthorn breeders as well as a blueprint for what they needed to do. And Robert Bakewell, of course, was 50 years there before, 50, maybe 100 years before them. And they used the references that he did of breeding in, breeding them tight, breeding them close, and monitoring all the records of what happened when they did that.
I mean, Bakewell, he wrote the book literally on how to make a breed. Mm-hmm. And, decide the traits you want. And so, people were not goring anybody's sacred ox because there was 9 initial strains up in northeastern Scotland. And also, they Shorehorns came in there and got used some after the Durham ox. He toured all of Britain and
the Shorthorn, right?
Up into Scotland. But I mean, at that time, those Highland cattle, they would only weigh a couple hundred pounds at 4 years of age. They were terrible. And then all of a sudden, a 3,000-pound Durham ox, rolled into town. It would be like a space shuttle coming in. It was just so different and so magnificent to them that anything can be that big and that fat and that productive. So, I mean, they sucked into that really hard and blew past their environment, quite frankly. But I mean, gosh, it was the pace. I'm amazed at all the geniuses that coalesced at one time, both in England and then in Scotland in that age of enlightenment and agricultural revolution. And gosh, they were so good. And Bakewell, he wrote the book of how to make a breed by breeding like to like. You choose the traits you want, you find those particular animals, and then you breed like to like, regardless of relationship, until they breed true, consistently.
It's a simple blueprint, and it's something that I wouldn't say it's been lost now. I think now, with the genetics are so widespread, we don't see people understanding that blueprint, let alone following it. And I do know I know one particular guy, I won't say now, breeding sheep in Australia, and he studied and buying books on that, and he developed an entire breed of sheep by following Bakewell's principles. They still apply, Bob. They still apply, but we obviously have a lot more traits now with genomics and everything else to be able to sort it out. But those guys just had their eye, didn't they? And they had their eye, and they had the pedigrees, and that was the way to go.
The like to like still, to me, applies every bit as much. Now, you start breeding over inbreeding, like what Hugh Watson's, his ideal Angus was Booth's Charity and necklace or bracelet. Yeah. The 2 Shorthorn heifers that won so much. Those were kind of his ideal, what
Yeah,
he thought
yeah.
was an ideal animal to breed towards. But yeah, once they had it in their mind, I mean, they did put that like to like and kept a long-term focus, and that's how you do develop a breed or a breeding program. I just
Mhm.
spoke at a program where a person that was doing a terrific amount of line breeding, and now, but you do have to watch because I mean, line breeding, you'll get a lot of line breeding depression and reproduction vigor. We have Line One Herefords here, which have it's been inbred since the around 1930, and
Mhm.
they're so tightly wound that they give up 500 pounds of yearling weight in inbreeding depression. But the
Mhm.
moment you cross them out, that 500 pounds immediately comes back,
Yeah,
even
yeah.
within breed. So
It's a science, isn't it? And we credit Bakewell for that science, I think. But as you said, Watson, if we're going back to judging these one guys against each other and their impact maybe on their Watson followed that trend to the point where he was inbreeding very tightly. And if you look at the pictures of old Granny and whatever, okay, she was getting old, but that inbreeding went in there. Whereas McCombie was actually, he wouldn't let it go too tight, would he? I think he was less keen. He was keen on, he understood the line breeding, but he wasn't just going to start firing down that, as you said, the bracelet and firing the father and daughter matings there to see what he got and take the casualties the ones went out. He had a little more intelligent line. They say inbreeding and line breeding, the old joke, but I know, but he had a little bit more intelligence around the line breeding, I think, McCombie.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, Hugh Watson was almost, he almost had extremes because, like, one of his champion heifers was out of one of his nurse cows, so actually
Mm,
had some uh, Guernsey in him.
mhm,
So, but in general, he did line breed. He had some great cattle. We don't necessarily know what all their pedigrees were because they got burnt when he died and they were
mhm.
never turned over to the herd book. Where McCombie would introduce new strains of cattle fairly regularly, he felt line McCombie in his own, you know, putting it in his words, he felt line breeding was a very useful tool to a point. And then if you took it too far, he felt, in his opinion, it was against nature and against common sense to take it to the extreme. So
There
yeah,
was a
he
little
did
bit of
all up.
religious pushback from that as well. Or was that maybe in the short ones where the church, bearing in mind we're going back into days when the church would be quite prominent in Scotland, but didn't the church push back a little bit about this incest, as they called it there, with these breeds? Would that be in Watson's time, maybe?
Well, yes, absolutely. Especially, as you moved up north, they had gotten over that in England
Don't
because
say everybody in
already,
Aberdeen was inbred because you'll get everybody on the phone to me, Bob. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, people thought uh, Bakewell was crazy. I mean,
Mm,
literally, they just thought, I think they used the word quite daft that,
mm.
that the way he was breeding, father-daughter matings and those kinds of things. But when King George took some interest, then they kind of changed their tune whenever he took interest in his breeding
King
success.
George, the most insane man that's ever been on the throne, I think.
There you go. But he was a friend of agriculture, that's
He
for sure.
was. He was indeed. Let's just tie this up a little bit here. I'm going to say you're on McCombie side, and I'm going to say maybe the biggest. I think Watson probably was more the pioneer because he was the man that had no blueprint. He had nobody to follow. He just had what he got in front of him, and he had an idea that maybe he could create a breed and there wasn't a breed. And I think that gives him the real leading light in being the most influential man that ever got involved in livestock, let alone, or certainly ever got involved in cattle, maybe with Bakewell and the colours, but and the short ones. But he's the man that took that breed forward. But then he did a dastardly deed, and I just don't understand why. I mean, he didn't share his information about. He for all he was Jack the lad there running about in his nice clothes, and even to an older man, he wouldn't let anybody see what he was doing. And I think that tells me when somebody doesn't let you see what they're doing, they may be doing something wrong. And on his deathbed, said to his wife, "Hey, just pop downstairs and see that big trunk full of information that I've saved for the last 60 years. Just set fire to it." I think that's probably a crime. I think it's probably punishable with death.
It certainly it didn't do us a great service. I mean, the number of animals that are actually got in the herd book or from Watson's were secondhand. And it was secondhand information on what their pedigrees were, the animals that were sold out of his herd, and there wasn't many of them. McCombie's herd was definitely totally in the herd book, and to your point, Watson was a great farmer. I mean, not only breeding really good cattle, but I mean, soil amendments, transportation. I mean, he used to ship it. He was such an entrepreneur. He used to ship in shiploads of bones from Sweden, and he would grind them up and sell them for soil amendments. He had lime kilns. He had a place with a limestone and some coal, and so he burned it for lime. And so, I mean, he put the whole thing. He even funded Bell in a reaper machine,
Mhm.
and helped promote that. I mean, gosh, he was into everything, and did a whole system of agriculture. So I'll give you that one. But and Watson wouldn't use any inputs. Yeah, I think he thought would move him forward, whether that was Galloway or Shorehorn or whatever. But McCombie, he stayed pretty much to his principles on a pretty narrow inputs of local cattle. And with that, I think there was a lot of consistency, and ultimately Angus we're all about eating experience in the end. And you have to believe that McCombie, with that discipline, probably had the advantage on eating experience, especially when you combine it with his ability to feed. And he always trimmed his initials in the cattle's hair, so when they went to market, they knew that they were his. I
Yeah.
mean, so they brought a premium.
And I think that was probably the secret that made we've gone full circle now, of course, where people do want to know where their animals came from, and anybody's breeding good animals, they want their name on the supermarket shelf, or certainly at the front, they're going, "These are animals that I bred," and the pride that he had in that, and shifting these cattle down into Smithfield Market, with his name on the back of it, really was probably what made him the hero. Whereas Watson never quite saw it that way. I don't think, did he? He was. Maybe that 16-year gap, as I said, made the difference. But McCombie, as you said, becoming a feeder from being cattle dealers to suddenly realizing, hang on, rather than ship these store cattle down to, we call them store cattle, you call them different over there, but shipping these store cattle down to London, why don't we fatten these things and then send them down there, and as it became, to send them down there on the dead weight. So McCombie had that little bit of advantage by being that little bit later, maybe, but also a little bit more understanding about the carcass side of it. And I think maybe, again, I'm going against myself here that Watson perhaps didn't quite understand the meat eating experience in the same way.
Not to the extent of McCombie, that I think that's for sure. And McCombie had his faults. I mean, he used great science, yeah, to in his breeding program, and then he also had really some quirky things, like, and his main breeding pasture was by a neighbor who had red cattle. So he put
Okay.
up a solid wall where that abutted up against that neighbor's pasture in those red cattle, because he thought if a cow was looking at a red animal when it got bred, it was much more likely to have a red calf. And he didn't want any red calves. So he put up a solid wall so that his cows would not be looking at a red cow whenever they got bred. So I mean, he had that kind of quirkiness and that old timey thing that, the myth and legend that crept into his stuff, where Watson was, I mean, he did do agriculture on an experimental basis. I mean, he pushed it forward as hard and as fast as he could. But I mean, as a human being, I guess Hugh Watson probably has the definite advantage for being more fun at any party or sing along or anything else. But uh, uh, McCombie was a great public servant and really took care. He took so much pride in having his workers participate in plowing contests, and if they won, it was like he won. And I mean, and when he was in Parliament, he was all about taking care of small producers, and I mean, he really looked after the little guy, and I have to, as a human being, I think although he was rough and gruff on the exterior, he didn't say much, and that usually intimidates people. But I think that was because of insecurity. But gosh, he was a good person. He really was a good person. But if I wanted to go have a beer, it would be with you, Watson, without a doubt.
That's exactly how I was going to sum this up there. We've got both of the men, fantastic men in their own right, different men in their own right, and did things different ways, but both made that impact on the breed that we know and love. But yes, you're right. Hugh Watson, good man. Let's go and have a beer with him, and we'll probably all get very drunk and not find our way home. McCombie, we'll go and have a beer with him, and he'll be the man carrying you back home and making sure you're back in your bed in the evening. And I think that sums up the difference in people in life as well. So I think that's a great analogy we've done there. And I'm going to ask you, the listener out there, to maybe send me a few. I'm going to put a poll out there and just send me a click, one or two, whether you think Watson was the man or McCombie was the man who made that effort, or maybe neither of them for that. And Bob, you and I. Moving on, I'll leave that to you, the listener. The McCombie versus Watson argument probably been going on for years or centuries. Or, not an argument, but a discussion or debate. Bob, you and I were obviously very much involved in the research on these two characters. A lot of information, the stuff we've mentioned tonight, had never been seen before. We've uncovered stuff from so many sources, the stuff that hadn't really been out there. There was a status quo. People knew about Old Granny. They knew about McCombie going to Paris, these things. A lot of the things they didn't know. And that's what you and I put together in this fantastic book of the history of Angus. And it's not just a history of Angus that's been there before, Bob. We've turned a few stones, haven't we?
Oh, I think it's a fantastic book from that respect because I mean you learn all about agriculture in general because I mean the things that like Charles Townsend did with crop rotation. We wouldn't have the breed of Aberdeen Angus we have if it wasn't for his innovations and all the other great people. Bakewell, Jethro Tull, and the machinery that he came up with. Thomas Koch, who led in soil amendments, Joseph Elkington in soil drainage and soil dynamics, and Arthur Young, who really invented agriculture journalism. I mean, you guys were. I mean, it was this phenomenal group of geniuses, and then the people that like General Wade and Thomas Telford up in Scotland, and they what they did for the transportation infrastructure that allowed agriculture to grow and prosper. I mean, there were so many phenomenally bright people, and then you throw in Watson and McCombie, and they're two more of those really bright, great people that you guys had at that time, and I find that happens in history where you get this collective groups of geniuses all gathered at one time. And that's when society, science, breeding, whatever takes these giant leaps forward. And this in Great Britain was definitely one of those times where agriculture is substantively different than it would have been had this group of geniuses not been together at the same time.
Sure. I totally get that. And the guys in Scotland go, thank you very much, puffing their chest out and saying, well, yeah, we did all this stuff. But the book obviously goes on and it covers, the cattle first arriving in America. And then we go through, how America also populated the West and the Angus eventually ousted the Shorthorns. And then, the Herefords took over and Angus ousted those as well eventually. And then so we cover a whole, the whole spectrum, I think, really, through until the last, sort of 20 years ago, where great men like Dave Nichols and guys that have developed these great herds and have gone down these routes and the strides that America made in performance recording and how they took that stuff forward to performance records and indexes now that are true and of course how between them and us populated the rest of the world with Angus cattle. So yeah, we've all got a part to play here, Bob.
Oh, I mean, it is really fun, and it does bring in, like some of the great sires that went to New Zealand, and the tremendous number of Canadian cattle that went. I mean, the first cattle that went to North America went to the Carnegie, the great
Yeah,
Sir Lord Carnegie.
true, true.
He had after his wife died, he spent a year exploring Western Canada, and he became friends with the Hudson Bay governor of the Hudson Bay Company, the British company,
Mm.
and he shipped him a prize bull and cow. But unfortunately, those were the first ones to hit North America. But unfortunately, he had a stroke and died about the time they arrived. So I kind of think they ended up on a spit rather than getting bred. But I mean, one interesting thing was we had this big fat on Bates Shorthorns,
Mm.
Thomas Bates, and they thought they could not be improved upon. And so they just inbred them and inbred them and inbred them until they went extinct.
Mm.
And so all these guys had all these high dollar, cattle, and they
They
had
were big money as well, Bob. You're talking like three or four thousand dollars back then,
and one sold for
Mm.
$45,000 a
Yeah,
cow. One
yeah,
sold
yeah.
for like 35,000. The one that sold for 35,000, they walked to the farm next door 2 days after the sale, and she keeled over dead. Just because she was so inbred and lacked vigor.
Mm.
The high selling bull ended up being a Cryptorchid that was
Mm.
infertile. I mean, so that whole thing collapsed. But the interesting thing is, then they jumped over into Angus. And
Mm.
so
Yeah,
he
yeah.
started the same thing with
Very
Angus.
quickly. We're talking in a decade or more, really, not much
Oh
more.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Mm.
in a heartbeat. Matter of fact, one of the Canadians had to take his Bates cattle back over to England to disperse them because they had no value anymore in the
Yeah.
United States, so he shipped them back. But unfortunately for the Angus world, the we had a depression in 1893, and that pretty much took all those investors because they were highly leveraged coming out of that Bates Shorthorn deal, and
Mm.
they were rolling along, and they started bringing in Galloways because people didn't know the difference. And that rushed our herd book along, which was good. But anyway, that depression took most of those guys out, and then we got on to firm footing of just some good solid breeders that wanted to improve the cattle.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
I mean, there's fast. Nobody knows about that kind of thing. I
No,
mean,
no.
it's all new information.
Bob, I'm privileged to know you, privileged to work with you, privileged to stay at your house. Thank you very much, and you're always most welcome to come back here to Scotland. But absolutely privileged to be there in the company that you're in there with the research that you've done and still researching now. Last time I spoke to you, writing a book about chickens. It's not just cattle. You're a man that just still wants to learn and to know. And I think what you and subsequently myself and Tom have brought to the world in this Angus history book is something that people should maybe take a look at. And hey, this time of year now, Christmas presents, pass them on to people. But it's not just to your old great grandfather or your grandfather who was an Angus breeder. We just looked at the books just this week, and we sold a good number of books in this last month in the States. And you said quite a few of those are Simmental breeders and various things. I think if you're a cattle breeder or you're interested in it as well, it's a good solid plug here pre-Christmas. You guys want to get in there. This is a book that's going to give you some information and the fruits of our research for the 3 years of work that we did. And Bob, yourself and I, 20 years of information before that of how the Angus breeds shaped the world, but also how the world shaped the agricultural industry.
Well, the complementary skills were so important in this. I mean, your skills, your writing skills, your knowledge. My my skills in chasing down rabbit holes for unknown facts, and Tom's knowledge of pedigrees and stuff is unparalleled. I mean, those skills were extremely complementary, I think, in producing this book. And one thing that I think is unique about this book is we have 1,600 pieces of art in it, and
Mhm.
so it's a beautiful book to look at. It's a great book to read cover to cover if you can get the entire history. And we also build it full of sidebars with just fun stories. I mean, just fun stuff that you would, you just wouldn't catch otherwise, And to me, it's a three-way book. You sit on your coffee table. If you want to know the history of agriculture and Angus, read it from cover to cover. If you just want a quick read while you're sitting there, read some sidebars. If you just want to look at some beautiful art, that it's in there. And we all supplied some of that art. I have a pretty big collection of that, but not many books can say they can do all three of those things right. And you can get 10% discount right now by putting in Xmas 25 in the code when you order your book till through the first of the year.
Sure. And as you said, it's not. Hey, we're on an unashamed plug now, which wasn't really the start of this podcast. We're talking more about what we've learned from it, and what we've learned from the breed and the interesting facts around it. But it is just it's something that you can treasure for, should be treasured for a generation. I think a book that on the shelf there that's not. I don't know anybody that's finished this book yet, Rob. I've been Bob rather. There's been. Hey, you and I took a long time to finish writing. I don't know anybody that sat there and read it from one end to the other. There's information you can tuck back into and find and have another look back all the time. Keep it on the coffee table, and it's something that's nice to own. So we won't plug it any further, Bob. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and it's nice just to chat about those two things. And my listeners, I call you the listener, but there is more than one of you, I think. Let's just you guys let us know whether you think McCombie was the better, more influential breeder in the Angus world, or whether Watson was a more influential breeder, and that depends. That's not whether you're just an Angus breeder now. I mean, I'm doing some talk to the guys next week in France, and we're talking about the Edwina's breeder family and the Erica family, all those families that are in the breed today. Some of those go back to those breeders, but we're not just talking about influence they had on the breed, but also whether who's the good guy amongst those, Bob. And then we're not going to who's the good guy, you and me, Bob, but we're going to who's the good guy, McCombie or Watson. Who's a good guy, McCombie or Watson?
Yeah. I mean, they were two great people. Can I leave us with one quick story as we leave here, and just to show how this book covers things. In the standard histories that are written here in the United States, the first office that was owned by the American Angus Association, it just states in there they don't know why they moved there. It was in Harvey, Illinois. And so we researched that, and it turned out it was Turlington Harvey, who was the immediate past president, and John Clay Jr. From Scotland was also on the board and helped hire the executive. And so so Turlington Harvey was doing this planned community, and so they did the negotiations while he was still president, and so it wasn't a big mystery because Clay was also a voting member on the board while they went to Harvey, Illinois. But the really fascinating thing is it was a utopian community where if you had to sign off that if you gambled, drank, had lewd or immoral behavior, you had to forfeit your property. So that's new information. Nobody knew that. So I mean, if you want some weird facts, boy, they're in here.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to move into this village here in Fife where I am here now. So I'm not going to drink or any of the other things there because I've had to go fairly quickly. Not with my reputation, yeah, right.
Yeah, you could click off all those, couldn't you?
pretty much, pretty quick. Bob, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and you guys at angushistorybook.com, if you're interested in picking up a copy of this book this time of year, or any time of year for that matter. It's been absolute pleasure working with you, Bob, and 12 or 18 months on now, and we're up over 1,000 sales of this book. It's done us really well, and we never went in it for the money, Bob, but just help us out with our Christmases as well, guys. But just dive onto the website, and at the moment you're going to get a discount too. So angushistorybook.com.
Thank you so much, Andy.
Bob,
And it's always a pleasure.
okay. Well, Bob, we'll speak to you again soon. We'll hopefully see you again soon.
Yeah, that would be great.
Well, as I mentioned there at the start of that episode, thank you again so much to you out there in listening land worldwide. I think we go into 30, 40 different countries around the world there. So hello to all of you, and thank you so much for all the times that you've tuned in to the Top Lines and Tales podcast. I'm very grateful to you. It's something I didn't think we'd make it for 5 weeks, let alone make it 5 years. So thank you for all that time. And of course, thank you very much to Harborough, our partners and sponsors that we've worked with now for most of that time. And Harborough have been fantastic helping out with this. And I'd like to think that our partnership with Harborough goes both ways. So have a look online and see what Harborough can do for you on the internet, or pop down to your local store, pick up whatever you need there, have a chat to the guys down there, see how Harborough can help you with your nutritional requirements and the whole range of products that they do, especially coming into winter now. We're getting into feeding time, so try their food, speak to their rep, maybe try their food against whatever else you might be using otherwise. So thanks again to Harborough, that great company there. Thanks again to you listeners, and as we mentioned in this episode there, please log into the Top Lines and Tales Facebook page, and I'm going to put a little poll on there so you can click either McCombie or Watson there, just for a bit of fun there, to see who you guys think came out on top during this debate that I had there with Bob. So thanks again, and we'll keep celebrating this 5 years of the Top Lines and Tales podcast, and it's great to have you along with us.